What is up, everybody? It's your boy Verta here, and thank you so much for stopping by, ladies and gents. It means a lot to me. Now, we're passing 8,000 subscribers onto this Verdict channel. How can I say it's mind-blowing and it's humbling at the same time. Recently, I've had one of the biggest spikes in growth, if not the biggest spikes in growth. I have never had more weekly subscribers than what I have had recently, and thank you so much for being a part of this channel, supporting it however you do seem fit. But before we start this video, I want to try something. I have a very ambitious desire to probably reach maybe 9,000, if not by the end of this month, then by the start of the next one. So my deep request from you is to like, subscribe. If you have friends who want to know more about BDO lore, then please share that video and this channel with them. And a very important bit is to mention the lore playlist. After all, it's about 4 hours and 45 minutes currently, without this video, long, full of Black Desert lore. And I think you guys will be very interested in. We're barely scratching the surface. This world has so many stories, worth of hundreds on top of hundreds of hours exploration. We live in a very enigmatic world filled with so many theories, and it goes so very deep. But in today's video, well, we have to talk about the most gruesome place in Black Desert's history, known as Orzeca. La Orzeca, the armor that everybody wants, the point of entry towards this very horrific story of this very horrific place. La Orzeca is an armor that we gather by obtaining the leftovers of the Kuturan, which we were to create from those leaves, the lungs of the divine tree, or in other words, one of the most essential bits for the Kuturan tree to continue its life. And very important, it is the reward of the armor of La Orzeca, which is the last remnant of the Orzecan kingdom, where the final moments of the lifespan of that place, the people of the denizens basically of Orzeca poured their entire malice, their entire evilness, all right, into those bits of armor in order for the remnants of Orzeca to never be forgotten and some influence to be still had of this ancient kingdom, whether it be from a fading relic of old. The Orzecan kingdom spans a long time ago, roughly around 1,000. We know for a fact that it is around 1,000 because it merges at some point with other very prominent moments in Black Desert's lore, and also a little bit of a teaser for the future. There will be a point of the story in Black Desert that we're kind of far away from, but we will go 1,000 years once the demon lands in Dawnbreak and Ataraxion is fully settled, and seeing where the story picks up from there. But a very important thing is right now to just establish where exactly was Orzeca. Well, the arid lands of Odilita was where Orzeca was from. When the Ahibs unfortunately fled due to their civil war with the Ganel in the Camasylvian region, they fled to the arid lands as exiles, the arid lands of what we know right now as Odilita. But in the ancient times, those places were very different. They were barren wastelands. They were completely engulfed in darkness passages. It was a kingdom found onto nothing but stone and goth. You could really say that the motif of the ancient kingdom of Orzeca is the goth motif. Think of the dark, tall churches. Think of those particular moments in order for you to kind of pretty much imagine how the kingdom looked in your minds. The ancient kingdom of Orzeca spanned all the way from Gai Fenrisia up until the end and the entry of the Mountain of Eternal Winter, with it going slightly over into the Dragon area as well. It is pretty much an empire, although it is called a kingdom. It spans 3 great regions of our continent of Black Desert. So the ancient kingdom of Orzeca is a kingdom found onto the premise of power above all. But what makes it so horrific is how everybody plays into this bit in unison, in the sense of this is the culture of Orzeca, this particular place with such horrific practices where humans are being cultivated for different horrific means, this particular place where the entire hierarchy is based on who can kill the guy in order for them to go up above. We know for a fact that there was no such thing as a royalty in Orzeca. If you were to be a part of this chain, you had to be a part of this chain in the sense of proving that you can be there. We have characters who went from nothing to become the biggest in Orzeca. We have characters who simply never could make it out of Orzeca. And we have, of course, kings and hexes who would really fight over the current rulership of Orzeca. But a very important trope here is to understand that every single person played into this. I often enough recall in my videos about Orzeca and expressing how everything is tied to Orzeca. Think of Orzeca as our bottleneck, into this story of Black Desert. Orzeca is an irredeemable place. There is nothing but darkness inside. It is a place which pretty much makes Tolkien's Melkor or Morgoth look like a baby. It is a place where it would get the Chaos Gods pretty much go like, yeah, that's crazy. It's a place where when gods found it, they didn't even think about it post that. The most evil dude in our entire mythos of Black Desert, Khadum, learned of Orzeca and said, okay, and just simply moved on. This is how terrible the Orzecan kingdom was. So Orzecans cherished this goddess. It's known as the goddess of Thornwood, and it's a very important thing to explain how she came into this setting, because we have to understand what exactly happened, but understand three very important things. A lot of what we know from Orzeca is from Crypt of Resting Thoughts, where, well, it's under Ahib occupation so far. The Ahibs definitely have tempered up with these records, and I always like to describe Orzeca as such. It is 33% complete fabrication, it is 33% propaganda, and it's 33% truth. And where you will land in terms of where your allegiance is in Black Desert, which faction, whether or not which you are with the Ahibs, the Ganel, whether or not you are one of Guardians or Draconias, all of this takes place into what you actually believe. So the ancient kingdom of Orzeca worshipped the Thornwood goddess, the goddess of darkness, the goddess of Thornwood as we recall her. How she came there is very interesting. According to the Ahiban myth, which we find behind Odore deep inside the mountain's cave, we see this particular myth, and it tells us a very important story. It tells us about the civil war between the Ganel and the Vidir, and how the Sylvian mother of the elves was lost. It was because of the spirits of Camasylvia who tapped greedily into the power of Sylvia, which bestowed all of her might into her spirits so that they could govern instead. And what they did was they drained her to their fullest. So she fled under the disguise of this small little frail girl into the arid lands of Odilita, where in her final moments, as she is about to perish, or at least I recall so, she is found by the Tunkuta and she's being tended to by them. It is somewhere afterwards where the Orzecans discover her and kind of see her as an entity, because in their offering she would give them power. So within an instant, the dark goddess of Thornwood became manifest, and they took her as the being which they would cherish. And they would not just simply cherish her, they would put their entire beings into her as a means of sacrifice for even more power. They would basically cut the lowest echelon so that the power structure would maintain itself in order for the Thornwood goddess, which is kind of pretty much like a pyramid scheme. She would keep on rewarding the strongest who bring more sacrifices. So this is one of the very few entries of how brutal the regime is in the Orzecan kingdom. So now we have to talk really about without going into too much detail, really about kind of the dynamic and what in particular happens in Orzeca. Because we know, yeah, it's a very horrific kingdom. Yeah, sacrifices. I've been speaking about this for a long period of time. But many people know that, well, Zarka was in Orzeca. That's a very important bit, and many people know that in the Orzeca was where the Unix flame also arrived there. So now we have to really explain kind of in a brief way the history of Orzeca. So let's go. Orzeca had a very ruthless king. Of course, obviously, it is the most dark place and ruthless place in our setting. And think of this motif where the king has a sorcerer or a sorceress, which is now called a Hexa. But bear in mind, those hexes are a little bit different, and I will get into that in a moment. However, the king and the Hexa have been doing something. See, remember when I said how everybody contributes into this entire culture of sacrifice? Everybody has this I spit on you to become more powerful types of thing. The entire setting of Orzeca is simply as such if we're to believe what is being told. See, everybody schemed against everybody, and you could never trust anybody at any single point. However, mutual interest is what collected people into Orzeca to kind of create their own little echelons, which land depending on where your interest is. So, while the Orzecans have the lowest, like the slums, the plebeians of the plebeians who lived over to the scraps for the pure meaning, just make sure they stay alive so at one point they can't be sacrificed. This is literally the dynamic over there. And the Hexa, which I mentioned earlier, was known as Hexa Moa. See, the king and the Hexa, while they were kind of adversaries, they had a very common touching point, and that touching point was that they wanted both of them to become very powerful. So the king, using the Hex, basically the person of sorcery from the kingdom, would be very beneficial, and that dynamic would prove them both to stay up on the top echelon for a long period of time. So eventually what happens is Hex Moa and the king at a particular time, they harvested those sacrifices to the Thornwood goddess. Eventually, however, something would happen. See, whenever you are so dark, whenever you're so evil to the point where, you know, the eyes of gods avert upon you, you need to understand that that is pretty much the highest form of compliment that you can get. And of course, who saw the ancient kingdom of Orzeca? Of course, Hadum. Hadum himself, he really became quite aware, because Hadum is the god of despair. And where else would you be drawn in but in particular to those sacrifices which were put on there, those people who just couldn't stop despairing over their inevitable fate? So one thing that was seen was, well, Hadum sent his servant Ibidor to go out there, see what he can do about Orzeca, and essentially, you know, not that they needed to be turned over to the darkness, they were already dark as crazy, but rather they wanted to solidify Orzeca and the motif of despair, the emotion of despair, to be the prime thing in Orzeca, to solidify the top piece of the pyramid so that it would rule forever and the emotion of despair could be ushered into the world. This is basically what Hadum wants to do. So Ibidor would come forward into Orzeca disguised as a denizen, and he would observe what they would do. Now imagine if you're literally the lieutenant of Hadum, the person who is second in command, and what you would do is you would go out there, see what these guys are doing, and it's like, you guys are insane. Ibidor didn't even have to do much. Ibidor did something very simple, and that is he just made sure he triggered the opportunity for the king to feel threatened of his rule, and the Hex to be threatened by her essentially kind of second-hand rule in a sense, because the Hex is a very important piece of this particular kingdom. And what they did was they just made them fear that all of this would happen in order for the entire regime to topple into, well, unless we despair, we will be brought to ruin. This was the entirety of the thing which happened. So to explain this situation, and warning, it gets very graphical, it gets very grim, and if you have a sensitive heart, then, you know, be warned about the story which I'm about to tell. In one particular day, when the children were brought for the so-called harvest, the so-called cultivated slums, you know, Hexa Moa was not not particularly a moral individual, obviously so. A very big issue. See, everybody wanted those sacrifices who, kind of went into the kingdom to be secret. People didn't want to have all of this done because while the ancient kingdom of Orzeca would be, oh, my best friend just went up missing, everybody knew what was going on. It was just like this. The dynamic was just so horrific. Hexa was annoyed in one particular bit. She was annoyed at the cries of the children. Found them as nuisance. Why must you cry? Why must you go through such length in order for you to complicate my idea of your sacrifice? This was the train of thought of Hexa. One day she did a very specific thing. She was looking forward to easing up this conundrum which she was over there with, trying to figure out how does she make those children stop crying. So she decided to just shove them in a cold, dark cave. So that she did. But see, that didn't help a lot because the cries became even more prominent. She was even more annoyed by this particular situation. So she had to put in her hex magic and ingenious mind and look for a different solution. So she went out to a very specific person known as Cantarnia. Cantarnia was one of the founders of the Orzecan kingdom and the architect of Orzeca, the person who entirely invented this goth horrific motif, this cold and dark kingdom, think of it as such. So what she did was, well, she spent her time, Cantarnia that is, having a little bit of a hobby. That's one of those particular moments where she would create those small little toy soldiers of brass and bronze. So Hexa had a little bit of an idea. Hexa was like, hey, can I have those? So she paid for the service and she took all of those little toy soldiers and was like, well, here's what we can do. Let's just go ahead and bring those toy soldiers to the kids so that at the very least they would stop crying. This nuisance of their cries would simply stop. So she gave those little toy soldiers, hoping that would basically cut it, right? But here is the plot twist. See, you thought that at the very least she would give them some reason for a little bit of a smile, and maybe she would look forward to easing. We know what's going to happen to those poor children, but it's the ancient kingdom of Orzeca, and if you think it doesn't get dark, it gets very dark. See, the ancient kingdom of Orzeca did something very brutal. Well, Hexa enchanted those little toy brass soldiers of bronze and brass, basically, to suck in the negative emotions of the children that played with those. So what she did was, she was annoyed by them, gave them those bronze toys, and the children were they thought something was about to change, only for them to turn into husks while they were playing with the soldiers, pretty much with the most blank expressions, and you would just hear the particular toys onto the ground go like tick, 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 tick. This would be the only thing that you would hear in that cave. And this speaks to the gruesomeness of this story. And if you thought it's not gonna get bad, if you thought this was pretty much not it, Ibidor arrived in all of his splendor, and what could possibly go wrong with Ibidor? Well, Ibidor came into this cave, disguised, and he was like, well, here's the thing, that's good and everything, but we could use this a lot better. He would speak to those kids and was like, you should not despair as much as you do. We want you to go and sing of hope. We want you to feel like there is salvation. Why would you sit here? Why would you be all this negative about your situation? You could sing at the very least hope for salvation. And the kids took this to heart. And what they did was they started hoping and feeling better. And if you thought that this could be basically it, right? At least there was some positivity to this. No. Ibidor would take those particular children's toys that already sucked out the emotions. You could say that they kind of sucked a portion of those children's souls. And what he did was gave breath of life to those toy soldiers known as the Gyphon soldiers. Yes, the ones which we kill, the Gyphon Rissia monsters. are essentially the bits of the children emotions which rule over these toys. Upon hearing what was going on into the jails, of course, obviously the soldiers came through and they had to eliminate the sacrifices. They had to, of course, in very cold blood, get rid of what happened with the soldiers of Risia, essentially. But the plot twist was that they wouldn't be able to die. So in the future, they got locked into the Risia temple, or at least this is what we believe in particular happened. So this was one of Ibidor's very brutal tricks in the ancient kingdom of Orzeca. And here's the plot twist. You might think, but wasn't he the servant of the god of despair? Why would he ask them to sing of hope? Yeah, exactly, right? And this was my first reaction as well. See, upon the Hex and the king, hearing that there was some conundrum into their secretive cave, the guards reported of what happened. They went there and they saw the slaughtered, sacrifices. And the survivors spoke about this individual that came through and told them to sing of hope. And the king and the Hex took this personally. They were like, what is this? So the legend of the shadowy serpent snake Ibidor kind of really starts there for our world in a sense. And a very important thing is being made. The king and the Hex are convinced that they didn't get slaughtered because of basically the fact that, somebody interfered with their plans. No, they got slaughtered because they sang of hope. This is basically what was kind of their train of thought at the time. So, of course, what they do is like, okay, we need to stop everybody from ever hoping, because if this individual is being drawn to those sacrifices because they sing of hope, this was their train of thought, they were manipulated in a very gruesome way, then we must plunge the world into despair. And this is exactly what they did. A king decree came forward, plunging Orzeca into years on top of years of despair, where no positive emotion is ever to be had. We kind of shut this page right now of the Orzecan times, and we move into the future. See, whenever you plunge everybody and you order for people to do only one thing, of course there's always a rebellion. There is always hope. You can never extinguish hope. Fact of the matter is that while Ibidor's plan really did work, he did not anticipate that the Orzecan people are capable of hope. So secretly, in this particular time, there was a plan by Hexmoa. Hexmoa was like, okay, if the goddess of Thornwood is not strong enough to protect our sacrifices to her, this is the story that is being told to us, then it is evident that we need something better. It is evident that, of course, if the goddess won't help us help her, then there is something wrong with this relationship here. And they started, a little bit of a prayer. They went to the goddess and they asked for something that would resolve the situation, and the goddess of Thornwood bestowed upon the ancient kingdom of Orzeca its so-called salvation, known as the Kuturan tree. The Kuturan tree is one of the most important bits in Black Desert lore. Its remnants define the current ages as well. It is the god tree bestowed by a god. Think of it like the god's child once, you could say it like this, and a very important thing began. See, they had an idea. The goddess of Thornwood would obviously not create a god that would replace her, right? But this was the motif of theirs. So the entire worshipping of Orzecans went instantaneously, withdrawn from the goddess of Thornwood into the Kuturan tree, and this would mark the Golden Age of Orzeca. And now we have to define what happens in this particular time. See, the Golden Age of Orzeca has a very important and pivotal moment. The entire desire for hope right now would solidify the kingdom's basically new train of thought, you could say as such, and they would understand that despair is truly not the key to the salvation of the kingdom, but rather they want hope to protect against despair. The two separate emotions, because to hope there is despair, to despair there is hope. So what the people did to get off of these times, 1,000 days of prayer, and sacrifices were offered to the Kuturan tree. So the Kuturan tree was empowered to such extent to the point where it itself gave a birth through its sap, through its seeds, to a god, a brand new third god into this entire mythos. And that god is known as the god of hope, Zarka. Yes, the god of hope was Zarka. It was his upbringing to be the reply of the Kuturan tree. You beg for hope. You want the salvation of the kingdom. And the tree gave exactly this. So Zarka, the god of hope, immediately with his arrival, expelled the despair off of this kingdom. And Ibidor's plan to plunge it into, well, pure and nothing despair, so that it would empower, it would work as a battery for his dark god of despair, Hadum, immediately shattered. And Zarka became the ruling god, not just of Orzeca, but his influence was so big to the point where it shielded the world against Hadum. We know this in particular from the Ulukita records. So now we know this dynamic. Zarka is born, the Golden Age of Orzeca comes through, and within the next years to come, Orzeca prospered, military-wise, prospered everything in terms of the lower echelon of people were feeling good. The sacrifices did continue, but now they had a different dynamic. See, in my previous video with Nova, I spoke about the Echidna Convent, one of the most gruesome things that have been done in the Thornwood Kingdom, into the Orzecan Kingdom. So a very important thing to mention very fast, the Echidna Convent is essentially a sisterhood of high priests named after the high priest Echidna herself, who was an Orzecan. And that high priest in particular had a thing. See, the Kuturan tree is not just one. The Kuturan tree's powers could be split by snapping the branches, planting them, their seeds, and kind of making different copies of the Kuturan tree. However, the Kuturan tree's essence would slowly start to diminish the more copies they had. However, a trick was devised to empower the Kuturan tree, and those small little copies that was bestowed to the different parts of the Orzecan kingdom, they would still function as a Kuturan, and those trees could stay connected so that the power would be there. And the Echidna Convent was the attempt to make more military power for the Orzecans so that they can go outside of their regions and conquer the entirety of the world. This would be their plan. So the Kuturan tree was in a tricked state, however, and this was the true motif of the Echidna Convent. The Echidna Convent would create those artificial human beings. They would serve as militaries, but they would be far from perfect. They would just meat thrown into the battlefield. And those who came out faulty, those who came out unworthy of being the war machines they were desired to be, a very bad and gruesome fate awaited them. As little children, they would be tied, stuck, and pierced upon the tree and be left in a perpetual state of sacrifice, because while the tree also gave the wishes of the people, the tree would also heal people. So those unfortunate beings created by the tree would stay wrapped in these thorns, forever bleeding, never capable of death, so they would be stuck there as living batteries so that the Kuturan tree's power would not diminish. Fun times. Now let's move into a little bit future times, because the ancient kingdom of Orzeca stood for quite some time. It wasn't a thing that occurred just for a few years. Long story forward, Zarka, at this particular time, he is the god of hope. He brings whatever wish you would have forward. Zarka would literally, you would go out with an offering of Zarka, and he would bring forward what you know, and eventually this story of this god of all wish giving and everything would spread around the world into the close regions. Eventually, a very important notoriety heard about this. In fact, there were two people who heard about this. Of course, Silverfront and Bahit Lalakona. And those two individuals are very, very, very important, because while Silverfront was an emissary, let's just call it, of the Mountain of Eternal Winter, he heard about this story. He heard about all of those particular places. At this point, of course, Mountain of Eternal Winter is not called Mountain of Eternal eternal winter. It has a different name, but he heard about the god of gifts, the god of wishing. So what he did was, well, Silverfront, who is an external character of this story, heard that somebody could fulfill a wish of his, and that wish was for him to be able to truly fall in love with a dragon, and that dragon was none other but Labresca. So him and the Knights of Dawn, with, of course, Bahit Lilokona, they went into the ancient kingdom of Orzeca. They were provided with an audience, and, you know, Zarka, in his ultimate glory, greeted Silverfront and asked him for his wish. And what he, of course, said was, "I wish to feel the love of dragons." And Zarka, for the first time ever, at least we believe, actually requested something in return. Because the only thing that could make you fall in love with a dragon would be that dragon to give you your heart. So he asked to present him with the Phoenix Flame. The Phoenix Flame is a very big deal, but I do not wish to go too much into it. All you need to know about the Phoenix Flame is that it is essentially a metaphor for Labresca's heart. Labresca the Golden Dragon. So what happened, long story short, Silverfront, the Knights of Dawn, and Bahit Lilokona, they had very interesting opinions about Orzeca. They saw what this thing was, and they understood that if you were to bring forward the gift of the god of origination of this world to Zarka, then this is not really a good idea. And of course, Bahit Lilokona, they were Orzecans after all, at least we believe that they were Orzecans, and they didn't like what the dynamic was at the time. The kingdom would grow lenient because they had an all-protecting god that would simply be there to serve them in all ways possible, and they would wish and wish and wish and wish and wish to the point where Orzecans just simply were creating those artificial humans to as literally robots to fight their enemies and to conquer the world. It would not look good. So a plan pretty much was devised at that particular point. Well, everybody knows that the Phoenix Flame is the only thing that we know of in this world that can kill gods. So what they did was they took the Phoenix Flame from Labresca. It was a gift from Labresca to Silverfront, which is ironic because she already gave him her heart, which is literally an I love you moment, pretty much. And Silverfront, in his stupidity, goes into Orzeca, believing that the Phoenix Flame would not just simply be that. And of course, here is when the Golden Age of Orzeca simply goes to a halt, and it is officially over. Because when Silverfront and the Knights of Dawn with Bahit Lilokona, they arrive there, a very important tragedy occurs. See, they already made up their minds. Orzeca cannot continue to exist with such a powerful entity there with them. And what they did was, using the Phoenix Flame, they seared Zarka's flesh. They wanted him dead. And Zarka, the god of hope, would so-called fall into this particular moment, with the temple collapsing over them and the Knights of Dawn beginning the big war of Orzeca, which would be essentially a revert back into the times where, well, they were fighting over power. So now, with the god of hope so-called presumably dead, well, they went immediately into their dark times. And Silverfront, the Knights of Dawn, leave Orzeca to their inevitable defeat, but the plot twist was to be had. See, this is a little bit of a theory, but many people share this theory with me. Zarka was capable of surviving because the god of hope never got any of those sacrifices. At least there is no evidence anywhere showing that they would sacrifice things to Zarka. Instead, all sacrifices that Hexa herself conducted, we believe they were kept for her. And the big question of how Zarka survived, although we do not know, we believe that there was a contingency plan, there was a backup just in case something horrific like this happened. And we believe that this is the point where Zarka became from the god of hope into the lord of corruption, or at this time as the god of corruption. So Zarka, in his enrage of the fact that he was betrayed after giving everything that they have ever wanted, toppled Orzeca to near ruin. He destroyed over half of the kingdom overnight. They reverted back to their old ways. They went again into this particular caste system, and they were, however, running out of people. They would know that, you know, the Zarka project, whatever it would simply no longer function. And what was done was, well, they tended to the Kuturan tree, but it would be weak. And they understood that this could probably not work as well. And all in the meantime, and you as well forgot, and while I was telling you the story, I forgot the Thornwood Goddess was there, observing the entirety of the thing. And the Thornwood Goddess would grow weak, again, in the similar way how her powers were drained from the spirits, if we are to believe this myth to be true, from the Kamasuvian spirits, essentially her being Sylvia. She would grow frail, she would go weak, she would go barely capable of keeping her eyes open, and the Orzecans immediately returned back to her with prayers once more of hope and salvation from this particular moment. At this time, Axion, the king of the dead as we future know him from the Orzecan story part of Nova's awakening, he was the ruler of the Orzeca. He would be known as the last king of Orzeca. And here is where it gets so poetic, because Axiom, despite the fact that the past people of the ancient times of Orzeca at the end of the kingdom were horrific beings, he would beat them all to it. He would sacrifice himself, his victims. He would drink and paint with their blood while he was trying to usher Zarka back into this world. This is kind of the split of the Orzecan mind, the ones who went with the goddess of Thornwood and the ones who tried to bring back Zarka to rule them. And those two things would be the reason for which Orzeca was actually brought atop ruin. So with that being said, the Thornwood Goddess and people who would go after and hope for the salvation of the Orzecan people, you know what she did? This is something that I love so much. This is something that I love so much. What she did was poetry. She granted them a thorn of the Kuturan tree. And that thorn, of course, a sting, was bestowed upon the people who prayed for the salvation. And what they did was they went into the opposing part of the Orzecan kingdom, and they would slay Axion, the king of the dead, who was rumored to be immortal. But of course, with the power of the Kuturan, they managed to kill them. The poetry here is that this would topple Orzeca, for it to be forgotten forever and ever, and kind of not to be forgotten, but rather to be destroyed, the kingdom to simply cease to exist. What the Thornwood Goddess did was, I might have been evil, but you crossed all lines. So she gave them the weapon for their destruction, and the Orzecan kingdom simply destroyed itself. And that's one of the great bits of this lore, the great bits of the Orzecan story. And I hope you guys enjoyed it. We still live with the aftermaths of the ancient kingdom of Orzeca. The sheer fact that you tread upon the soil of Odilita is a sheer influence of Zarka. His energies run so deep to the point where it still, till this day, corrupts the Ahibs if they are not careful. The civil war between the Ahibs happens over the worshipping of the Thornwood Goddess or Zarka. Everything that is on the arid lands of Odilita is subjected to the gruesome fate of Orzeca. And that's one of my favorite stories, and Orzeca is my favorite bit of Black Desert Online. Hope you enjoyed. Like and subscribe, share this video with people, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.